Welcome to the Academy of Sleep, your peaceful haven for calming lectures designed to help you drift off to sleep. I'm Mellow Matt, your soft-spoken narrator with a love for quiet stories, gentle facts, and late-night wonder. I'll be here to guide you into rest, one sleepy lecture at a time. If you enjoy our bedtime journeys and would like to support the channel, you can treat me to a warm virtual brew via Buy Me a Coffee. The link's in the description. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and enjoy tonight's lecture. Lost Civilizations of South America, History of the Amazon and the Andes. Introduction, a dream, woven with history. Close your eyes and listen to the silence. Feel the worries of the day slowly drift away like a warm evening breeze. Tension melts from your body. The noise of the world fades, and you begin to sink into stillness. Tonight, we're setting off on a journey, one with no maps, no roads, a journey through time into a world long vanished, leaving only whispers in the desert, the mountains, and the memory of the earth. When people speak of indigenous cultures in the Americas, they often think of the North, of the Apache, the Iroquois, the Sioux, or they remember the grandeur of the Aztec and Maya empires in Central America. But South America holds its own quieter story, a forgotten chapter rarely told. Though all these peoples trace their origins to ancient migrations across the Bering Land Bridge, their paths diverge dramatically. While nations rose in the north and center, far to the south, among the soaring Andes and sun-baked coastal valleys, emerged civilizations the world has nearly forgotten. This lecture is about those peoples, the indigenous cultures of South America. Those who lived among mountains and deserts, built cities of clay and stone, mastered weaving and pottery, honored nature spirits, and conquered impossible heights. We'll leave behind the better-known northern empires and turn our gaze to the southern lands, to the civilizations that came long before the Inca. South America, land of towering peaks and endless deserts, rushing rivers and starlit nights. Thousands of years ago, peoples lived here whose names few remember. Their cities lie in ruins, their histories almost erased. But if you close your eyes and listen, you might still hear the wind telling their stories. This lecture is more than a tale of ancient civilizations. It's a gentle descent into the past, where the breath of history lingers between the lines, a story interwoven with sleep and the souls of those who lived long before us. Not just the Inca, but those who came before them, the weavers, the builders, the artists of the earth, those who shaped the land with their hands and left behind mysteries in stone and sand. We begin at the very start, with the first humans to reach South America, and will follow in their footsteps through time, watching simple lives give rise to empires and dust give way to memory. And when the story ends, may their world become a bridge to your dreams. Through the veil of centuries, through the sound of rain and the grains of time, we hear their footsteps. Their world is gone, but its memory still breathes in the earth, in the mountains, and in the wind. Chapter 1. Before the Civilizations. Long ago, far beyond the reach of names and memory, before the Inca built their fortresses in the sky, before the Nazca traced their lines across the breathless desert floor, this land already held its secrets. South America, isolated by oceans, girded by jagged mountain spines, and cloaked in dense jungles, felt like a world unto itself. Yet even this continent, wild and vast, had once stood empty. And then the first footsteps came. Scholars believe that the ancestors of the indigenous peoples of the Americas crossed the Bering Land Bridge, a ribbon of earth that once spanned the icy waters between Siberia and Alaska during the last great ice age. It was not a march of conquest, but a long and silent drift. Families and tribes, following the migration of animals, searching for warmth, shelter, food. Their journey took them through glaciers and frozen valleys, through windswept plains and forests that whispered in unknown tongues. For centuries, perhaps millennia, they moved slowly south, spreading across two continents they did not yet know as home. Eventually, some of these early wanderers reached the great unknown at the bottom of the world, South America. Here, they found not one land, but many. Towering mountains veined with silver and snow, deserts that bloomed once a year with flowers, then slept in silence, rivers that curled like serpents through dense green jungle full of thunder and teeth. In this vastness, they began to stay. The first South Americans were hunters, gatherers, fishers, living not in cities, but in small bands. They hunted guanacos and rheas, fished along the coasts, and foraged the high plains and shadowed forests. They knew no monuments, no written laws, only firelight beneath the stars and the long memory of the land. And yet, as the world grew warmer and the ice withdrew, something changed. Bit by bit, these scattered peoples began to settle. They learned to plant, at first by watching which wild grasses grew best, which tubers fattened in which soils. They began to tame the land. In the high Andes, they cultivated potatoes, quinoa, and maize. On the coasts, they grew beans and squash and gathered salt. Even in places where the soil was poor or the rains failed, they found ways to coax life from the ground. They carved the mountains with terraces, dug channels for water, and taught the earth to feed them. With farming came stillness, and with stillness, culture. Families became villages. Villages became communities. People began to shape more than soil. They shaped memory, ritual, and imagination. They painted stones. They shaped little gods from clay. They carved symbols into cave walls. They told stories about the sun, the wind, and the spirits in the hills. These weren't the empires we remember. No golden crowns, no armies, no kings, but something older and just as powerful. The beginnings of belief. Around 10,000 years ago, this quiet revolution had begun to ripple across the land. In the coastal deserts of what is now Peru and Chile, early peoples built fish traps and nets, made bone hooks and storage pits. In the highlands, they raised llamas and alpacas for wool and meat, learned to dry and preserve food to survive the cold. They domesticated guinea pigs. They began to understand the seasons, how the stars foretold the rains, how the moon pulled at the earth. Slowly, they began to mark time, and as the centuries passed, something remarkable began to take root, a deep and reverent bond between the people and the land. In the Andean worldview, humans were not separate from nature. The mountains, the rivers, the stones, all were alive. They spoke, they remembered, they gave and took. Spirits lived in the earth and sky. The rain was a blessing only if it came in balance. The sun was not just light, but a father. The earth, Pachamama, was not just ground beneath their feet, but a living being who must be honored, fed, and respected. This belief would become a foundation of every civilization to follow, from the smallest farming village to the great empire of the Inca. Respect for the land was not superstition, it was survival, and in this respect was born something beautiful, a way of life that saw no division between the sacred and the everyday. These early peoples left no written records, no great stone halls or grand pyramids. What they left was subtler, a woven cord of survival, belief, and shared labor. They passed down their knowledge not through books, but through story, song, gesture, a way of planting, a way of mourning, a way of calling out to the moon. Each generation gave a little more shape to the future. In time, leaders emerged, elders and healers, dreamers and warriors. Perhaps for the first time, someone spoke not just for a family, but for a people. Priests appeared, dances grew more complex, offerings were made to the sun at dawn, the sky became a place of meaning, the earth a partner in prayer. Most of their names are lost. No chronicles recorded their births or deaths. Their villages were built of reed and earth, their homes long worn away by wind and time. But they lived, they loved, they struggled, they raised children, they taught, and in their hands they held the tools that would shape all that came next. Because of them, cultures like the Paracas, Nazca, Moche, Wari, and Inca could rise. Because of them, maize would be planted on 1,000 slopes, and prayers would be whispered into mountain winds. Because of them, this continent would one day shine with cities of gold and be painted with stories in clay and thread. And so now, as we leave this quiet, forgotten chapter of time, we turn to the first of those cultures that grew from this ancient root, a people who wove fabrics finer than any since, a people who reshaped the very bones of the human skull in pursuit of beauty, of mystery, or of the divine. In the next chapter, we journey to the world of the Paracas. Chapter 2: The First Sacred Places. Long before temples rose and rituals were carved into stone, there were places that simply felt different. High hills where the wind sounded like voices, caves where the sun only reached once a year, springs where the water tasted like iron or like rain. The first peoples may not have called them sacred, but they returned to them again and again, and over time, those places became something more. The earliest shrines of South America were not built, they were discovered. A clearing where birds never sang, a mountain peak always wreathed in mist, a stone shaped like a jaguar, worn by time but unmistakable in form. These were not places of ceremony as we know them. There were no altars, no columns, only a fire, a circle of stones, a mark carved into a rock, but they held meaning, passed down by voice, by gesture, by presence. Perhaps a grandmother pointed and said, "There the spirit lives," and that was enough. Archaeologists have found some of these places, caves with red handprints layered across the wall like generations of memory, stones stained with ochre and ash, shell offerings buried far inland, carried for days through jungle and mountain to be placed with care and with silence. Even the stars became sacred ground. The early peoples of the Andes were some of the first in the world to read the sky, not just as myth, but as agriculture's clock. The Milky Way above became a river of the heavens, echoing the sacred rivers below. The Pleiades signaled the planting of maize. The dark constellations, formed not of stars, but of shadows within the stars, became guides and gods in their own right. These ancient astronomers needed no observatories. A crack in the stone, a notch in a cliff, a post that cast its shadow just so, these were their tools. With them, they tracked the solstice and the equinox. They watched the heavens shift, and with them planned their days. For them, time did not tick, it breathed, and in this breath of time, the beginnings of ritual emerged, offerings of food, circles of feathers, bones placed in careful rows, music played on bone flutes, whose notes still echo across the highlands in memory. Children grew up hearing these sounds, watching the elders bow their heads, and learning the names of winds, rivers, and stones. They inherited not just land, but a language of reverence. Over centuries, the sacred became more formal. Shrines became sites, stones became symbols. Communities began to build, to give shape to the invisible. Pillars of wood, carved totems, raised mounds, simple platforms where voices could reach the sky. Here, perhaps for the first time, a people gathered not to eat or hunt, but simply to remember, to offer thanks, to speak to something greater than themselves. This was the heartbeat beneath the future empires, long before Cusco and Chan Chan, long before kings and chronicles, the idea that some places were holy, that nature had a voice, that the world itself was alive. And so, as we return to the quiet rhythms of those earliest days, the planting of seed, the kindling of fire, the tracing of stars, we carry with us the first truth those ancient people knew, that to live well, one must listen to the earth, to the wind, to the ones who came before. Chapter 3: Paracas, Weavers of Cloth and Bone. Our journey through ancient South America continues. We travel back around 2,500 years to the southern coast of what is now Peru, a place where the desert meets the sea. Here, a mysterious culture once flourished, the Paracas. For centuries, little was known of them. Their traces lay hidden beneath layers of sand and silence. Only in the early 20th century did archaeologists begin to uncover strange and unusual burial sites in this region, tombs unlike any others in South America, sparking debate, wonder, and mystery that continue to this day. The Paracas were master weavers. They created remarkably fine and vibrant textiles, cloaks, mantles, belts, adorned with intricate patterns and symbols. Preserved by the dry desert air, their fabrics still astonish modern researchers. The weaving was so delicate that some patterns can only be seen under magnification. Using natural dyes, they achieved brilliant reds, blues, yellows, and greens. Their exact recipes remain a puzzle, but Paracas are not remembered only for their textiles. One of their most haunting legacies lies in their skulls. Hundreds of skeletons have been found with elongated, stretched craniums, shapes so unusual they seem almost extraterrestrial, with long, tapering backs of the head. The truth, however, is very much of this earth. The Paracas practice cranial deformation, a ritual reshaping of the skull. From infancy, children's heads were bound with cloth and wooden boards, gently guiding the skull to grow in a new direction. It wasn't an accident or medical necessity, it was a tradition, a belief system. To the Paracas, an elongated skull symbolized higher status, spiritual power, or divine connection. The more unusual the head shape, the closer a person was believed to be to the gods or the world beyond. Perhaps it marked priests, rulers, or the spiritually gifted. Perhaps they believed such a form made a person wiser, stronger, more attuned to the unseen. We may never know the full meaning they gave this practice. No writing has survived. Their stories were taken by the wind and the centuries. But the skulls remain, silent witnesses to the beliefs and rituals of an ancient people. Their necropolises were complex and intentional. The dead were wrapped in layers of fabric, placed in a seated position, surrounded by ornaments, tools, ceramics, and food. These were not casual burials. Every item had purpose, a guide for the journey into the spirit world. For several centuries, the Paracas thrived. They lived in harmony with the desert, drawing on the sea for fish, cultivating the land, and weaving extraordinary fabrics. Their world was deeply intertwined with nature, and the spirits they believed lived in all things, from mountains and rivers to wind and flame. Eventually, though, they vanished. No one knows exactly why. Perhaps they were absorbed by neighboring peoples, perhaps the climate changed, or perhaps time itself simply swept them away, like wind smoothing lines in the sand. As archaeologists explored the Paracas tombs, they found more than fabrics and bones. They uncovered delicate pottery, jewelry made of shells, carved wooden figures, and animal bones, a glimpse into a world where life and death, nature and spirit were in constant conversation. The Paracas engineered complex irrigation systems to farm in the arid land. They fished in the cold Pacific, gathered mollusks, and hunted seabirds. Their lives followed the rhythms of moonlight, tides, and shifting seasons. Every ritual was a way of honoring these cycles, of keeping balance between the human world and the unseen one. Researchers believe the Paracas held strong beliefs in the afterlife. Their dead were carefully prepared for a long journey beyond, wrapped in as many as 20 or 30 layers of cloth. Between the layers, they placed charms, small figurines, everyday items, and food. Sometimes jars of drink or dried fruit lay beside the body, offerings for the path ahead. Near the tombs, archaeologists found strange figurines made of wood or clay, some depicting people with elongated skulls, others shaped like animals, birds, or mythical creatures. These may have been tied to their creation myths or to gods they believed watched over them from the skies. The Paracas culture was both refined and fragile. For centuries, they lived in balance with their harsh environment, preserving intricate traditions and creating art that still speaks across time. But around the 1st century CE, their culture began to fade. Whether due to conflict, climate, or internal change, no one is certain. Some scholars believe the Paracas were gradually absorbed into the culture of the Nazca, the mysterious people who would later carve enormous figures into the desert floor. Elements of Paracas art and ritual appear in early Nazca work, as if their memory lived on in a new people, in a new form. But the Paracas themselves are gone. Their villages are silent, their rituals lost. All that remains are the fabrics buried beneath the sand and the skulls shaped by belief, voiceless reminders of an ancient time. And yet, when we gaze upon those textiles today, when archaeologists gently unroll cloth that still holds color after 2,000 years, it feels like touching the past, a world that is no longer here and yet lives on in stories, in legend, and in dreams. In the next chapter, we journey into the desert, where another people, perhaps inheritors of Paracas wisdom, etched vast and mysterious lines into the earth, visible only from the sky. We'll meet the Nazca, artists of the desert whose secrets still stir the imagination. Chapter 4: Nazca, Artists of the Desert. After the Paracas culture faded, a new people rose along the southern coast of Peru. Their name is now known around the world, not for conquest or gold, but for the riddle they left behind in the sands. These were the Nazca, artists of the desert, creators of enormous drawings that still inspire awe and debate. The Nazca civilization began to take shape around the 1st century CE. They lived in a harsh land among arid valleys and barren hills where rain might fall only a few times a year. But like the Paracas before them, they learned to survive. They built irrigation canals and grew maize, sweet potatoes, beans, and cotton in the dust. Their lives were shaped by nature. They valued every drop of water, fished from the Pacific, and hunted in the desert. Yet above all, they became famous not for their crafts or conquests, but for what they left carved into the earth. In the flat plains that stretch between coastal hills and mountain ridges, the Nazca created one of the world's greatest enigmas, the Nazca lines. Thousands of long, straight paths, geometric shapes, and massive figures of animals and plants etched across the landscape. A monkey, a hummingbird, a spider, a lizard, a whale, each one so vast it can only be seen from above, as if meant for the eyes of the sky. Why did they make them? And how? The questions remain. Some researchers believe the lines aligned with the stars, forming an enormous calendar. Others think they were sacred paths walked by priests during rituals. Some theories speak of water, magic, or even distant visitors from the cosmos. Yet one thing is certain. These lines were made by human hands. The Nazca scraped away the dark stones of the surface, revealing the pale soil beneath. Preserved by the dry climate and still air, the lines have survived for centuries. But what message were they trying to send, those people who lived here 2,000 years ago? Were these pleas to their gods, maps for ceremonies, or perhaps just a way of adding beauty to the earth around them? The lines were only one part of Nazca life. They also made vibrant ceramics, painted with birds, fish, and mythical creatures. Their vessels were decorated with elaborate symbols that reflected their beliefs, their daily life, and their imagination. The Nazca built temples and ritual spaces. Their religion was deeply connected to the elements, to water, earth, and sky. They believed that their ceremonies helped bring rain and fertility. Perhaps the desert lines were offerings to those powers, prayers drawn onto the earth. But Nazca culture also held darker rituals. Archaeologists have found evidence of human sacrifice, skulls bearing signs of violence, and burial sites that hint at desperate ceremonies in times of drought or hardship. It seems that when nature turned its back, they turned to the gods with blood. For centuries, the Nazca lived in delicate harmony with their desert home. Their civilization thrived, leaving behind artwork, sacred beliefs, and the haunting geometry of the Nazca lines. Beyond the mystery of the figures in the desert, the Nazca led grounded, practical lives. Their homes were modest, built of reeds, wood, and stone. They settled near rivers and canals, where water could be found, a resource more precious than gold. In the valleys, they carved terraces for farming, cultivating maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers. They knew how to make the most of every inch of land. They were gifted artisans. Their ceramics still impress with their bold forms and colors. Unlike other nearby cultures that preferred realism, the Nazca embraced abstraction and fantasy. Their pottery features birds with human faces, animals with wings, and strange hybrid creatures born of myth and dreams. These were not just decorations. They were expressions of a worldview, a belief that the world was alive with spirits and forces both helpful and dangerous. Every image, whether on pottery, cloth, or the desert floor, was part of a conversation with the unseen. Rituals played a central role in their lives. They made offerings, held ceremonies, and prayed to the spirits of mountains and water. Their temples were simple but full of meaning. Archaeologists have found remains of shrines and ceremonial spaces, places where priests may have watched the stars, held festivals, and begged the heavens for rain. Despite their skill and deep connection to nature, the Nazca could not escape the fate of many ancient civilizations. Around the 6th century CE, their culture began to decline. Climate change may have played a role. Long droughts, collapsing irrigation, and exhausted land could have made life impossible. Internal conflict might have added to their fall. Competition for dwindling resources, loss of faith in rituals and gods. Villages were abandoned. People moved to the mountains or joined other tribes. Their temples fell silent. Their fields lay dry. The paths they once walked disappeared into sand. Only the great lines remained, untouched, as if still waiting to be read. Today, when airplanes fly over the Nazca Plain, passengers see the massive figures that the Nazca themselves may never have fully seen. And perhaps that's the most touching mystery of all. They created images meant only for the eyes of the gods. In the next chapter, we travel further north, to the valleys and rivers where the Moche lived, a people known for their warriors, priests, and breathtaking ceramics that still tell stories of their lives, their beliefs, and their myths. Chapter 5: Moche, Masters of Clay and Ritual. Leaving the deserts of Nazca behind, we journey north to the fertile valleys nestled between the Andes and the Pacific Ocean. Here, from the 1st to the 8th century CE, flourished one of the most vivid and mysterious civilizations of ancient South America. They were known as the Moche. The Moche were unlike their southern neighbors. While the Nazca etched great images into the desert and favored abstract forms, the Moche told their stories in clay. Their pottery was more than practical, it was a living chronicle of their world. Scenes of war, rituals, hunting, love, and death were molded into ceramic with stunning realism. When archaeologists first unearthed Moche pottery, they were astonished. The faces captured in clay were so lifelike that researchers could reconstruct how these people once looked. The wrinkles of elders, the hairstyles of warriors, the earrings and tattoos of priests. The Moche did not idealize life. They showed it as it was, raw, sacred, brutal, and beautiful. They were skilled builders, constructing grand pyramids from adobe, sun-dried bricks made by hand. Their most famous structures, the temples of the sun and moon, still stand in the Moche Valley. The Temple of the Sun is believed to have been the largest building in pre-Columbian South America, made of millions of bricks, each one laid by hand, each bearing the mark of the people who built it. Rituals permeated Moche life. They believed in a spirit world, in gods that lived in the mountains, the sea, and the sky. Their religion was deeply tied to the rhythms of nature: rain, harvest, sun, and moon. Blood played a sacred role in their ceremonies. Archaeological evidence shows that the Moche performed ritual sacrifices, offering the lives of captured warriors to the gods atop their pyramids. These scenes are immortalized in their ceramics. We see processions of priests, battle rituals, sacrificial rites, and festivals. The Moche made no attempt to hide the duality of existence. To them, Life and death were part of one vast cycle. And yet, behind this fierce image was a people who cherished craftsmanship and beauty. Their golden jewelry, intricate fabrics, bold architecture, and richly detailed pottery reveal a culture of remarkable refinement. They engineered canals and irrigation systems to transform arid land into farmland, sustaining a thriving society through innovation and mastery of their environment. The world of the Moche was filled with meaning. Every item, every pattern on a vessel, every ceremony held symbolic weight. Their art was not merely decorative, it was a language, a bridge between humans, gods, and the unseen. Their pottery holds no random images. Some vessels show priests wearing animal masks, jaguars, serpents, birds, symbols of nature spirits. During ceremonies, people would don these masks to embody creatures that could speak to other worlds. Other pieces portray daily life, sea battles, hunts, and feasts, as though the Moche sought to preserve their memory in clay, knowing it might be all that would remain. Archaeologists have uncovered the tombs of high ranking individuals adorned with gold and silver. One of the most remarkable discoveries was the tomb of the Lord of Sican, a powerful priest or warrior buried with robes, jewelry, weapons, and sacred emblems. His grave spoke of status, of honor, and of a people who believed deeply in the journey beyond death. But like many ancient cultures, the Moche could not withstand the passage of time. Around the 8th century, their civilization began to decline. The reasons are still debated. Some scholars point to climate change. Long droughts followed by floods may have destroyed their irrigation systems and crippled their agriculture. Others believe internal conflict played a role. Rival cities, religious crises, or loss of faith may have led to division and decay. The people who had spent centuries building temples and canals, crafting vessels and stories, gradually disappeared. Their cities fell silent, their pyramids began to crumble, and their canals filled with silt and time. Yet the memory of the Moche was not lost. Their ceramics, buried deep in the earth, survived the centuries. Their temples still rise from the valleys, weathered but standing, and their stories, etched in clay, still speak to us of a world where art and ritual were inseparable and where life and death danced in harmony. In the next chapter, we journey farther north to the mysterious cultures of Lambayeque and Sican, whose golden lords built legends that shimmer through time. Chapter 6: Lambayeque and Sican, the mysterious lords of the coast. As the Moche civilization declined, new cultures emerged along the northern coast of Peru, inheriting the traditions of their predecessors while adding new layers of ritual, artistry, and mystery. Among them rose the Lambayeque, and later the Sican, peoples who would shape a golden age of sacred kingship, complex beliefs, and immense power. The Lambayeque culture appeared around the 8th or 9th century CE, rising from the fertile valleys between the desert and the sea. These lands, though harsh, were transformed by skilled hands. The Lambayeque engineered intricate irrigation systems that tamed the arid earth and allowed green fields to blossom where there was once only dust. Yet their true legacy lay not just in agriculture, but in brilliance. Quite literally, the Lambayeque were master goldsmiths. Their world shimmered with divine metal, gold masks, breastplates, crowns, necklaces, earrings, and ceremonial axes, all adorned with fine engravings and inlaid with turquoise, shell, and lapis lazuli. To them, gold was not merely wealth. It was sacred. It symbolized sunlight, divine authority, and the cosmic link between the rulers of this world and the gods above. These weren't just trinkets. Many were created for burial, offerings of power meant to follow their owners into the afterlife. The Lambayeque and their successors, the Sican, built massive tombs for their rulers. Inside these tombs, archaeologists have discovered astonishing treasures, ceremonial items, elaborate garments, and even the remains of servants and animals sacrificed to serve their lords beyond the grave. By the 9th century, Lambayeque culture evolved into what we now call the Sican civilization. Reaching its height between the 9th and 11th centuries, the Sican inherited much from their ancestors, but expanded it on an even grander scale. Their temples and palaces rose from the coastal sands, surrounded by engineered canals and networks of roads. They traded across long distances, developed fine crafts, and built a society governed by priests and celestial kings. The most iconic symbol of the Sican was the golden mask with crescent moon eyes, a haunting, otherworldly face that became the emblem of their civilization. This mask, found on ceramics, in tombs, and carved into walls, likely represented their principal deity, a god linked with the moon, rain, fertility, and the eternal cycle of life and death. Religion was the axis of Sican society. Their leaders were more than kings, they were divine mediators between mortals and the spirit world. Their funerals were orchestrated as monumental events. Alongside each royal corpse lay sacrificed animals, finely crafted vessels, and human attendants, all sent to continue their service in the afterlife. These burials reflect a belief in cosmic order and a strict hierarchy that placed the elite in direct communion with divine forces. The Sican world was one of splendor and solemnity, of shimmering gold and sacred blood, of elaborate ritual and reverence for celestial patterns. Their society was rigidly structured, dominated by a priestly elite who ruled through divine symbolism and public ceremony. Their power was vast, but not eternal. Around the 11th century, signs of collapse began to emerge. The forces that had brought down many civilizations before, climate shifts, social unrest, and loss of faith, descended upon the Sican as well. A series of intense El Niño events brought devastating floods, rains that wiped out farmland, and rising waters that breached sacred temples and homes. The once fertile land turned to swamp and ruin. What had taken centuries to build began to unravel. Crops failed, cities emptied. The people, once proud and devout, may have begun to question their gods. Some archaeologists believe there was a spiritual rebellion, that the populace turned against their priests and rulers. In the archaeological record, we find mass graves, evidence of violent deaths, and signs of hasty burials and broken temples. The golden age of the Sican ended not with a war, but with erosion of belief, of structure, of the land itself. And yet, they did not vanish entirely. Their culture lived on, reshaped and remembered by those who followed. The Chimu people, who would later build one of the greatest cities of the ancient Americas, likely inherited much from the Sican, their metallurgical techniques, their art, and perhaps even echoes of their gods. Today, we continue to uncover the traces of this vanished era. Golden masks buried beneath sand, vessels marked with moon-shaped eyes, and crumbling walls of once mighty temples. These fragments remind us that even the most powerful civilizations can be undone, yet something of them always remains. In the next chapter, we'll meet the Chimu, builders of Chan Chan, a city of clay and wind, one of the largest adobe cities the world has ever known. They would become the last great kingdom of pre Columbian South America, rising in the shadow of those who came before. On Chapter 7, Chimu, the Kingdom of Clay Palaces. When the dust of history settled over the lands once ruled by the Sican, a new power emerged on the northern coast of Peru, a culture destined to leave behind one of the most remarkable cities in all of pre-Columbian South America. These were the Chimu, builders of a coastal kingdom of vast ambition, intricate ritual, and awe-inspiring architecture. The Chimu rose in the 12th century CE, inheriting the knowledge, craftsmanship, and spiritual legacy of the Sican. For centuries, their civilization thrived, stretching along the Pacific coast in a chain of fertile valleys and desert oases. At the heart of their empire stood a city like no other, Chan Chan, a metropolis sculpted entirely from earth. Chan Chan was not just a city, it was a miracle of design and labor. Spanning more than 20 square kilometers, it was the largest adobe city the world has ever known. Its structures were formed from millions of handmade mud bricks, sun-dried and set into massive walls that enclosed ceremonial plazas, storage complexes, courtyards, and palaces. Ornamental reliefs lined the surfaces, stylized fish, birds, and waves, carved in rhythmic harmony. Within its labyrinthine walls, the city pulsed with life. Districts were arranged by function and status. Artisans crafted jewelry, weavers dyed cloth, priests prepared offerings, and farmers delivered tribute. At its heart stood the royal compounds, fortified, majestic palaces with elevated platforms, inner gardens, and shrines. There were storerooms brimming with food, vessels for rituals, and ceremonial halls echoing with the voices of those who once ruled. The Chimu were exceptional organizers. Their domains stretched for hundreds of kilometers, uniting coastal valleys and countless communities. They governed through a centralized system of tribute, collecting goods and labor rather than coin. Canals channeled water to parched fields, roads linked trade routes and ceremonial centers. Their kingdom was efficient, stratified, and deeply spiritual. Above all, the Chimu were master artisans. Their metalwork, refined from Sican traditions, achieved extraordinary beauty. Necklaces of hammered gold, turquoise inlaid breastplates, silver headdresses, and ceremonial goblets glinted in the light of coastal sun. These were not mere adornments. Each piece carried sacred meaning, worn in life and buried in death. The Chimu worshipped powerful deities, tied to the rhythms of nature. Their chief goddess was the moon, not the sun, for the moon cast her light even in darkness, glowing above their cities when all else slept. They revered the sea as the source of abundance, the earth as the womb of life. Rituals were woven into daily life, from offerings of food and drink to large-scale ceremonies invoking the favor of divine spirits. Their devotion found form not just in worship, but in city planning itself. Chan Chan was a city of order, streets laid in grids, districts clearly divided, walls bearing a visual language of waves, nets, and animals. The city whispered through symbols, a sacred script of mud and meaning. Yet beneath the surface of this beauty lay a rigid social structure. The Chimu realm was ruled by a divine monarch, considered semi-god, whose will shaped every life within the walls. Society was hierarchical and absolute. Nobles commanded, so some priests interpreted omens. Artisans served, farmers toiled. At the base of this great pyramid were the people who built it all, brick by brick, day by day. Still, the kingdom flourished, so through war and diplomacy, the Chimu expanded, bringing new lands under their dominion. Their influence spread across valleys, linking cultures and landscapes into one powerful state. But power, as always, came with a price. Despite their strength, the Chimu lived in fragile balance with nature. Their world, like many Andean societies, was built on the belief that everything was connected: the sky and the sea, the mountain and the human heart. Their priests watched the moon and tides, prayed for rain, and offered gifts to the spirits of the land. In times of crisis, that devotion could turn desperate. One of the most heartbreaking discoveries in Chimu archaeology is a mass sacrifice uncovered near Huanchaco. Over 200 children and young llamas, laid in careful rows, offered during a time of climate catastrophe. Scholars believe this act was meant to appease the forces unleashed by a powerful El Nino. Torrential rains, failed crops, flooding temples and homes. The Chimu, caught between devotion and disaster, turned to the only power they believed could save them. But neither gold nor blood could hold back the tide of history. In the 15th century, a new force rose from the highlands: the Inca Empire, swift, strategic, and unrelenting. The Incas offered the Chimu a choice: submission or war. The Chimu refused, and so began a slow siege. The Inca did not assault Chan Chan directly. They cut off its water. By severing the canals that fed the city, they drained its life at the root. Without water, the capital of clay began to crumble. Eventually, the Chimu fell. Their rulers were dethroned, their territories absorbed into the growing Inca realm. Their artisans were spared, but only to serve new masters. Their temples stood silent, and their people dispersed. Chan Chan was left behind, a city of mud and memory. Its walls, once bright and humming with life, began to fade in the wind and rain. And yet, even 6 centuries later, they still stand. Archaeologists walk its avenues, tracing the outlines of fish on plaster, touching the crumbling altars of forgotten gods. Each brick holds a breath of the people who once built the greatest coastal kingdom of ancient South America. But the story of the Chimu is not an ending. It is a layer, one among many, in the vast, unfolding fabric of the Andes. In the next chapter, we'll go back in time, before even the Chimu rose, to a people who built the first great empire of South America, the Wari, whose vision of unity laid the foundation for all who came after. Chapter 8: The Wari Culture, First Empire of the Andes. Long before the Inca raised their stone fortresses in Cusco, before the Chimu shaped their kingdom of clay palaces along the coast. Another power emerged in the heights of Peru, a civilization less known, but no less vital. They were the Wari, and they would become the architects of the first true empire of the Andes. The Wari culture arose in the 6th century CE and endured for nearly 400 years. From their mountainous homeland, they extended their influence over vast territories, from the Pacific coastline to high Andean plateaus, uniting dozens of valleys, communities, and diverse cultures under a central authority. They were the first to attempt what the Inca would later perfect: the organization of a continent into a single, unified system. Their capital, Wari, stood near present-day Ayacucho, perched more than 2,500 meters above sea level. For its time, the city was immense, home to as many as 50,000 people. Its streets ran in straight lines, lined with stone and adobe structures, temples, administrative buildings, ceremonial plazas, and residential districts. Protective walls encircled the heart of the city, while central storehouses and sacred platforms stood at its core. The Wari introduced one of the earliest known examples of urban planning in the Americas. Their cities were designed with precision, allowing for efficient governance and resource control. They developed roads to connect far flung territories, built storage facilities to house food, and practiced state sponsored resettlement, strategically relocating populations to strengthen their reach. The Inca would later refine and expand on these very methods. But the Wari were not just administrators, they were also artists, engineers, and spiritual visionaries. Their ceramics and textiles display extraordinary craftsmanship, adorned with intricate geometric patterns, stylized deities, and mythical beings. Their metalwork, though less abundant than that of later cultures, reveals an early mastery of form and symbol. The Wari pantheon centered around natural forces, deities of the sun, rain, earth, and stars. Their religion was closely tied to the cycles of nature and the sacred geography of the Andes. Mountains were alive with spirit, stars guided harvests. Rulers were seen not just as political leaders, but as intermediaries between the earthly and divine. Through them, the gods were honored and the cosmos was kept in balance. Ritual sacrifice was a part of Wari religion, not as punishment, but as offering. People, animals, and precious objects were given to the gods to ensure cosmic harmony. Ceremonies were held in plazas and sacred hillsides, accompanied by music, chant, and dance, a celebration of life and an acknowledgement of death. Wari innovations also extended to agriculture. They carved terraces into the mountainsides, created canals to bring water to dry land, and cultivated a wide range of crops: maize, quinoa, potatoes. These advancements allowed them to sustain large populations, even in difficult terrain. But like all empires, the Wari were not immune to time. Around the 10th century, their grasp began to loosen. The reasons are still debated. Many scholars point to climate change. A period of prolonged droughts may have disrupted agriculture, leading to famine and instability. Others suggest internal tensions. The difficulty of maintaining a centralized system over such vast and diverse lands eventually overwhelmed the state. As their agricultural systems faltered, political control weakened. Peripheral regions began to rebel or drift away. The once thriving administrative centers grew quiet. Roads, once traveled by officials and merchants, became overgrown and forgotten. Irrigation canals dried up, cities emptied. Archaeological evidence reveals this unraveling. In some areas, there are signs of destruction, violence, and hurried abandonment. Mass graves, burned structures, and the breakdown of public spaces suggest internal conflict and social collapse. The carefully woven fabric of Wari society began to tear, and yet the Wari did not vanish without a trace. What they built laid the groundwork for all that followed. Their innovations in governance, city planning, and infrastructure became the blueprint for the Inca. Many roads from the Wari era were later absorbed into the Inca road system, a vast web stretching across the Andes. Their system of food storage, land division, and resource redistribution directly influenced Inca policy. Wari religious concepts, especially ancestor worship and sacred landscapes, found echoes in Inca cosmology. Even the structure of Wari society, with regional administrators loyal to a central capital, reemerged in the imperial framework of Cusco. Their legacy lived on not only in policy, but in stone and memory. Terraces carved into mountainsides, roads still visible in aerial photography, ceramics depicting gods long silent, and oral traditions, the faint whispers of a people who dreamed of unity before the world was ready. In the next chapter, we turn to the people who wove all these legacies into a single empire, a name known across the world, whose golden age became the final chapter of ancient South American civilization. In the chapter to come, we meet the Inca. Chapter 9: The Great Inca, Lords of the Celestial Andes. When the civilizations of Paracas, Nazca, Moche, Sican, Chimu, and Wari had faded into the past, when their palaces had crumbled into dust and their canals lay choked with grass and silence, a new people rose in the highlands of the Andes, a people who gathered the fragments of those forgotten cultures and wove them into something grand, unified, and enduring. They built the final and most powerful pre-Columbian civilization of South America. They were the Inca. Their origins are wrapped in myth. According to legend, they were the children of the sun, born of the god Inti, sent to earth through Manco Capac and his sister wife Mama Oclo to bring order to a world of chaos. They journeyed in search of a sacred place to build their city, and in the heart of the mountains, surrounded by soaring peaks and fertile valleys, they found it, Cusco, the navel of the world. Historians believe the Inca began as a small tribe in the Cusco Valley around the 13th century. In the beginning, they were just one among many highland communities, unremarkable in power or size. But through diplomacy, war, and visionary governance, they grew. They absorbed neighboring cultures, forged alliances, and began laying the foundations of what would become an empire. By the 15th century, the Inca had forged a state known as Tawantinsuyu, or the Four Quarters of the Earth. It stretched from modern Ecuador in the north to Chile and Argentina in the south, from the Pacific Ocean to the Amazon's edge. It was the largest empire in South American history, encompassing thousands of kilometers and dozens of nations, languages, and customs. The secret of their success lay in more than their armies. The Inca were master administrators. They understood that unity required inclusion. When they conquered a people, they didn't erase their culture, they integrated it. Locals kept their traditions, even as they adopted Quechua, the Inca language, and were drawn into a vast web of roads, laws, and labor. They moved entire communities to prevent rebellion and ensured loyalty. They built roads, long, straight, astonishingly durable, that crisscrossed deserts, mountains, and forests. Messengers, soldiers, and caravans moved swiftly across this network, carrying news, tribute, and supplies. At the empire's heart stood Cusco, built in the sacred shape of a puma, an animal of power and protection. Its golden heart was Coricancha, the temple of the sun. Its walls once gleamed with plates of gold that reflected the morning light. Inside stood golden statues, sacred relics, and a belief that the sun itself dwelled there. Inca society was finely structured. At the summit was the Sapa Inca, the only Inca, a living descendant of the sun. Beneath him were noble families, administrators, warriors, and priests. The common people farmed, wove, built and served the empire through mitas, a labor tax that was not considered a burden, but a sacred contribution to the well being of all. Their economy was based not on currency, but on reciprocity and redistribution. People gave their labor. In return, the state provided food, tools, protection. Crops were stored in vast granaries, along roads, in cities, across mountains, filled with maize, potatoes, dried meat, and woven cloth. In times of famine or flood, these reserves sustained the people. Hunger, in theory, had no place in Tawantinsuyu. But what truly defined the Inca was their spirit. They believed in harmony between humans and nature. Rulers thus enruled ghosts on the earth. Their religion honored the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, the rivers, and the soil. They worshipped Pachamama, the Earth Mother, and Apu, the spirits of the peaks. Every rock, every tree, every stream had its essence, its spirit, deserving of respect and offering. The Inca celebrated life with festivals, rituals, and prayers. The greatest of these was Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun. Thousands would gather in Cusco's plaza. The Sapa Inca, dressed in gold and feathers, would offer prayers to Inti, asking for fertile fields and peace. They mummified their rulers, honoring them as eternal beings. Ceremonies were held for the dead, offerings made, songs sung. They believed in three realms: Hanan Pacha, the world of gods and stars; Ke Pacha, the world of the living; and Uku Pacha, the world below, where ancestors waited and dreams were formed. But no matter how mighty or balanced, no empire can stop the flow of time. In 1532, a Spanish conquistador named Francisco Pizarro landed on South American shores with only a few hundred men. At that time, the Inca were embroiled in a civil war between two brothers, Atahualpa and Huascar, both vying for the throne. The war had weakened the empire. Factions were divided. The people were exhausted. The Spanish saw their moment. They captured Atahualpa during a meeting under a banner of peace. Though the Inca paid an enormous ransom, rooms filled with gold and silver, Atahualpa was executed. With his death, the sun began to set on the empire. Over the following years, the Spanish dismantled the Inca state. They seized Cusco, looted the temples, and scattered the remnants of the royal line. Though the Inca resisted, retreating to the mountains, launching guerrilla strikes, they were outnumbered, outgunned, and overwhelmed. The empire fell. Cities were abandoned. Roads grew wild. Temples crumbled. But the spirit of the Inca did not vanish. To this day, their descendants live in the highlands of Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador. The Quechua language is still spoken in markets and homes. Festivals, weavings, songs, and offerings to the sun and the earth continue, passed down in whispers and tradition. The story of the Inca reminds us that even the greatest power is fragile, that no city, no army, no golden palace is eternal. But memory is, culture is, and the dreams of a people, their stories, their songs, their love of earth and sky, endure beyond empires. Chapter 10: Daily Life of the Indigenous Peoples of South America. When we speak of ancient civilizations, we often think of their temples and palaces, their pyramids, their wars, and their kings. But the true life of these cultures wasn't written only in gold or stone. It was lived each day in quiet gestures, shared meals, and the slow, patient rhythm of the seasons. Millions of people lived simple, grounded lives. They rose with the sun, cooked for their families, worked in the fields, raised children, celebrated harvests, and mourned their dead. Their world was not made of legends, but of mornings, hands, and heartbeats. In nearly every civilization of ancient South America, farming was at the center of life. Most people were farmers, waking before dawn to walk the terraces or irrigated valleys where they grew maize, potatoes, beans, peppers, sweet potatoes, and quinoa. These crops fed entire empires. Men, women, and children worked side by side. Everyone knew that the harvest was not just food, it was life, and it was sacred. In the Andes, where flat land was scarce, people carved narrow agricultural terraces into the mountains, capturing every usable patch of soil. They knew how to enrich the land, rotate crops, and channel rainwater through canals that snaked like veins across the hills. It was a sustainable, sophisticated agriculture, built not with machines, but with memory. While men tilled the earth or hunted, women kept the home alive. They spun thread, wove cloth, prepared meals, and raised the next generation. In some regions, women also helped build homes, care for animals, and gather medicinal herbs. Their work, though quiet, formed the backbone of community life. Food was simple but nourishing. Maize was boiled, roasted, or ground into flour. Potatoes were turned into chuño, freeze-dried to last through long winters. Beans and squash added variety. In coastal regions, the sea provided fish and shellfish. In the highlands, people raised llamas and alpacas for meat and wool. Their meat was preserved as charqui, dried and salted for storage. There was no waste. Every harvest, every catch was used with care. In villages and towns, the daily hum of life echoed through the streets. Children played with clay toys, chased one another through alleys. Artisans crafted pottery, wove baskets, carved wooden figures, and shaped amulets. In family workshops, weavers and jewelers made items that would be used in rituals or traded at local markets. People lived in modest homes, made of adobe, stone, or reeds depending on the region. These homes were often 1 or 2 rooms, shared by entire families. The floor was earth. There were no beds or chairs as we know them. People slept on mats, sat near the hearth to eat, and gathered around the fire in the evening. That fire was the heart of the home, a place of warmth, storytelling, and presence. But life was not only work. Every culture had festivals to mark the seasons, to honor the harvest, to celebrate the spirits of sky and earth. On those days, people danced in the plazas, shared food, sang old songs, and gave thanks. Offerings were made to the spirits of the rain and the soil, to the sun and the moon, to the ancestors who watched from the peaks. From an early age, children learned the ways of their people. They helped in the fields, fetched water, learned to weave and carve. They listened to stories of gods and mountains, of rivers and stars, of heroes and spirits. They inherited not books, but living knowledge, passed from voice to voice, from hand to hand. Daily life was simple, yet filled with meaning. Every task, every ritual, carried a connection to the world around them. People lived in rhythm with the earth, with sunrises and rains, with planting and reaping, with silence and storm. There is no separation between the sacred and the everyday. If we could walk through one of those ancient villages now, we would find a world made not of grandeur, but of careful detail. On the coast, walls were woven from reeds and packed with clay. In the mountains, homes were built from finely fitted stone, So well laid they still stand centuries later. Inside, water jars and woven baskets lined the walls. Cool, dark interiors offered shelter from heat and cold. Clothing reflected identity. Women wore long dresses and shawls made of cotton or alpaca wool. Men wore tunics and short cloaks. Patterns woven into their garments carried deep meaning, symbols of their community, their ancestors, their beliefs. The wealthier the family, the finer the thread and brighter the dyes extracted from plants, insects, and minerals. Children wore simple clothes and learned through doing. They played games that taught dexterity and courage, mimicking hunters, crafting dolls, learning teamwork. Their laughter echoed through courtyards and fields, bridging the gap between past and present. And at the heart of every community was the market. People came from nearby villages to trade food, cloth, pottery, shells, and charms. It wasn't just commerce, it was the beating heart of society, a place for news, celebration, connection. Stories were told, dances broke out, news of harvests and politics rippled through the crowd like wind across grain. In the evening, work would cease. Families gathered by the fire. The elders told stories of gods who lived in the sky, of warriors who became stars, of rivers born from tears. These tales, told by memory, kept their world alive. Not just the facts of their history, but the feeling of being part of something larger than oneself. Community was everything. Land was shared. Work was collective. Joy and grief were not born alone. People built homes together, harvested together, celebrated together. In these harsh environments, whether mountain or desert, survival was never solitary. It was shared. They had no written language, no books, but their stories lived in song, in pottery, in textile and design. They embroidered their beliefs, their fears, their hopes into every fabric, every carving, every gesture passed from parent to child. And maybe it was in this everyday life, not in the temples or the wars, that the real soul of these civilizations resided. The great cities, the pyramids, the empires, they were born from the hands of those who simply woke with the sun and lived with purpose, with care, with connection to the land and each other. And now, as we've looked into their world, not as monuments, but as people, people with chores, laughter, hopes, and habits, we begin to see that their story is not so distant from our own. It's a story of home, of rhythm, of being human, a story that still lives in the wind of the Andes, in the terraces carved into stone, and perhaps quietly in ourselves. Chapter 11: Shamanism and Secret Indigenous Practices. When the sun dipped behind the mountains and shadows stretched across the valleys, when the wind quieted and warm, fragrant smoke curled into the air, a different world awakened. A world not written in the chronicles of the conquistadors, not etched into stone or recorded in glyphs. A world of spirits and silence, of breath and vision. The world of shamans. Every people across South America had their own name for these guides between the seen and unseen. Shamans, healers, keepers of the path. They were the bridges between humans and gods, between the living and the dead, between illness and restoration. They knew the trails that dreams could walk. They listened to the murmurs of the forest, the whispers of firelight. These practices were not fringe beliefs. They were life itself, woven into agriculture, family, health, love, and death. Illness, failed crops, misfortune, these were never random. They were signs, symptoms of unseen forces in motion. But to speak with these forces, to mend the balance, one needed ritual, and those rare people who could see in the dark. When dusk fell and fires were lit in the courtyards, when wind hissed through the reeds, shamans gathered their people. Sometimes the rites were small, intimate, within a home, around a fire. Other times, they stretched for days, drawing villagers from miles around, gathering in sacred circles beneath the stars. Many of these rituals involved plants of power, nature's tools to open the mind and summon the spirit world. Most revered among them was tobacco. To many indigenous cultures of South America, tobacco was not a vice. It was a sacred plant, smoked not for pleasure, but for purification, for prayer, for protection. Its smoke was a bridge between worlds, rising like a whispered offering toward the sky. But tobacco was only the beginning. In the rainforests of the Amazon and the valleys of the Andes, shamans brewed other, more potent potions. Among them, the thick, bitter drink known as ayahuasca, the vine of the spirits. Made from sacred jungle vines and leaves, this brew induced powerful visions. To drink it was to see with new eyes, to visit other worlds, to speak with ancestors, to track the illness inside a soul, or to find a spirit lost. Under its influence, the shaman entered a trance, not metaphorically, but truly. They claimed to see the jaguar spirit, the snake, the ancestors' voices. Some journeys were gentle, full of light and song. Others, dark, filled with terror and trial. But all were part of the shaman's path, to walk where others could not, and return with meaning. And it wasn't just the jungle. Across the coast and mountains, other plants were used. In the highlands, San Pedro cactus, rich in mescaline, was consumed to invoke visions. Elsewhere, shamans inhaled snuffs made from the seeds of Anadenanthera trees, or chewed the sacred coca leaf, not as a drug, but as a companion against cold and fatigue. Yet shamanism wasn't only trance and vision, it was also herbalism, negotiation, divination, and diplomacy. The shaman was a healer, a counselor, a seer. Respected and sometimes feared, people came to them in times of doubt, illness, or uncertainty. Their words could calm conflict. Their herbs could ease pain. Their rites could restore harmony. And as night deepens and the fire crackles, let us look even deeper into this world. The ritual begins. A circle forms in the firelight. The shaman sits at its center, face half lit by the glow. He sings in low tones or whispers words no one else understands. People gather around, some seeking healing, others seeking answers. A few, perhaps, seeking something they cannot name. Drums begin, flutes wail, tobacco smoke rises, curling toward the sky like prayers. The shaman throws herbs into the flames, murmuring spells. Sometimes he sweeps his hands through the air, chasing away invisible forces. Sometimes he falls silent, listening to voices only he can hear. In many Andean and Amazonian beliefs, illness had nothing to do with germs or injury. It was seen as a disruption of balance, the work of an offended spirit, a curse, or a soul out of place. And so the shaman journeyed, seeking the root not in the body, but in the beyond. To find the cure, one had to speak with the other world. To do this, they returned to their sacred plants, to ayahuasca, to San Pedro, to tobacco, to the powdered snuff of trees and the coca leaf chewed to keep strength through the long night. These were no light ceremonies. The effects were real, often overwhelming. Participants reported vivid visions, emotional release, feelings of floating, or even being hunted through unknown realms. They emerged physically exhausted, yet convinced they had touched something greater than life itself. But here begins a different story, the story of science. Modern researchers, psychologists, neurologists, and doctors have studied these experiences. What shamans called traveling through spirit worlds, science sees as extreme intoxication. The psychoactive chemicals in these plants alter brain chemistry, triggering hallucinations, confusion, and a warped sense of space and time. In trance, critical thinking fades, the self dissolves, emotions become raw. It may feel like enlightenment, but it's the brain under stress, and chemistry unraveled, neurons misfiring in patterns mistaken for divine truth. Many scientists caution against romanticizing these rituals. The visions seen under ayahuasca or hallucinogenic snuff are not windows into another realm, but reflections of the mind, of fear, memory, and longing intensified by neurotoxins. These states carry risk, panic, psychosis, trauma, and for some, permanent mental disturbance. Today, some people from far away seek these ceremonies, chasing a moment of insight. They travel to the jungle, sit in ritual, drink the brew. But few understand that what they experience is not healing, but chemical trauma, nausea, racing heart, hallucination, and in rare cases, seizures. To the indigenous cultures, these rites were meaningful, part of a worldview where spirits were real, and the line between body and soul was thin. But we now know more about the brain. We understand that hallucination is not revelation. It is a symptom of imbalance, not insight. And yet, even knowing this, there remains a strange beauty in these rituals, in the firelight, in the smoke rising through the jungle night, in the quiet voice of the shaman singing to the dark. It is not proof of another world, but it is a part of our own. It is a part of our species' eternal yearning to reach beyond what we can touch, to ask questions the stars cannot answer, to find meaning even in shadow. Now, as this night drifts toward silence, may the shamans fade like the smoke they once summoned. May their chants be nothing more than an echo in your dreams, gentle, ancient, and gone. Chapter 12. If you ever go, a dreamer's travel guide to the lost world. If one day you find yourself walking the coast of Peru or standing beneath the mountains of the Andes, remember this. The past is not gone. It waits. It breathes. And some of it you can still see. You might begin in the south near the town of Nazca. There, if you climb into a small plane and rise into the sky, you'll see the lines, ancient, precise, massive, a monkey, a spider, a hummingbird, stretched across the desert like messages to the heavens. No one knows for sure why they were made. Maybe you won't either. But as you float above them, engine humming in your ears, the silence of that mystery will settle into you like sand. To the west, by the ocean, the Paracas Peninsula unfolds. Dry, red, and windswept, yet once home to weavers who created fabrics the world still struggles to replicate. In the little museum of Paracas, behind glass and quiet, you can see them. Threads dyed in colors pulled from plants and minerals, woven so finely you can hardly believe they're 2,000 years old. There are also the skulls, elongated, elegant, unsettling. You won't find a long explanation beside them, just a name, Paracas. But you'll know more now. Further north, past cliffs and deserts, the remains of the Moche world await. You can visit the Huaca de la Luna, the Temple of the Moon, and walk along walls painted in red and black, still bright after all these centuries. The faces stare back at you, gods, warriors, monsters. Their meanings are uncertain, but they will make you feel something old and deep. Not far from there lies Sipan, where the tomb of a great lord was uncovered, surrounded by gold, weapons, and the bones of those buried with him. You can't walk into the real tomb, but the museum they built to house it is quiet and cool. There, beneath soft lights, you can see a gold mask staring up from behind glass. It is smaller than you'd expect, but it carries the weight of centuries. Then, make your way to Chan Chan, once the greatest city made of adobe in the world. Its walls are tall but soft edged, slowly dissolving into the desert. You can walk through it in the late afternoon when the sun turns the clay orange and shadows stretch like memories. The carvings on the walls show fish, waves, pelicans, the things that mattered. You may find yourself listening. The wind has a way of sounding like footsteps. And beyond, far up, into the sacred valley, lies Cusco, the old heart of the Inca world. Walk its stone streets, where every block seems placed by a giant's careful hand. Visit the remains of temples and palaces. You'll see walls so perfectly fitted you couldn't slip a hair between the stones. They are quiet, solid, unchanged by time. The people here still speak Quechua, still chew coca, still bless the mountains. If you go even higher, you may reach Machu Picchu, the lost city in the clouds. But by then, you'll know. The greatest treasures are not always the most famous. You may remember the small things instead: a chipped bowl in a museum case, a line drawn in the dust, a path that disappears into silence. And if you cannot go, if life keeps you far from the deserts, the mountains, the places we've spoken of tonight, don't worry. These worlds are closer than they seem. They live in the stories, in the whispers of stone and thread. You've walked their roads tonight. You've flown over Nazca. You've stood beneath the painted walls of the Moche. You've wandered through clay cities and into the breath of Andean stars. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the best journeys are the ones that begin in quiet and end in dreams. Conclusion: remembering lost civilizations. Now, as our journey comes to an end, as the dust of centuries settles and we step away from the paths once walked by peoples long vanished from the face of the earth, let us pause for a moment and look back. We began with the earliest footsteps of humankind in South America, with humble tribes of hunters and gatherers who left behind no palaces or temples, yet began everything. Together, we walked through millennia, watching as modest villages gave birth to great cultures. We entered the world of the Paracas, weavers of wonder, who left behind intricate cloth and elongated skulls, believing that the human form could be reshaped to draw closer to the gods. We wandered the deserts of Nazca, where earth artists traced lines and creatures across the ground, visible only from the sky, their mysteries still unanswered, their voices faint, but still whispering through sand and time. We stood in the valleys of the Moche, among pyramids and temples, where warriors and priests offered blood to hold the world in balance. Their pottery told us stories of life and death, of fear and devotion. We descended into the golden tombs of Lambayeque and Sican, where rulers were buried with splendor and sacrifice, and where the echo of prayers to moon and sea still clings to temple walls. We walked the streets of Chian Chan, a city of clay, once filled with the pulse of the Chimu, whose earthen walls spoke of fish, birds, and waves, whose power was absolute. We reached back into the forgotten empire of the Wari, the first to unite the Andes into a single vision, and watched their rule vanish like morning mist. And then we climbed into the skies to the sacred peaks of the Andes to meet the Inca, the last and greatest of the Andean empires, builders of roads and cities, keepers of law and balance, uniting millions under the light of the sun. And we saw how even they fell to strangers and to time. All of these peoples lived and loved, created and fought, dreamed and despaired. They looked to the stars and the sun, feared the storms, worshiped the rivers, and built worlds that today we barely remember. Their names have faded, their languages are lost, their temples lie in ruin. But if you listen, in the wind above the lines of Nazca, in the stillness of Chan Chan's walls, in the stones of Cusco and Machu Picchu, their voices still speak. The story of these peoples is not just a record of the past. It is a reminder of how fleeting human glory can be, and how eternal the memory of the earth. And now, as you listen to these words, as your eyelids grow heavy, and your breath becomes steady and deep, know this: these peoples no longer wait to be remembered. They have long become part of the soil, part of the stars, part of the dream. Let their stories carry you into peace and silence. Let your thoughts, like leaves, settle gently upon the ancient roads, and may the night cover you as it once covered them. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Academy of Sleep to continue this journey into the world of knowledge and mysteries. Your subscription helps us create more calming lectures and keep the channel growing with peaceful, thoughtful content. And if you'd like to leave a token of kindness by the fireside, you'll find a link to buy me a coffee in the description. Until next time.